We've already helped millions of lower-income Americans in their households pay their internet bills because, as President Biden says, high-speed connectivity is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. And we're helping partners around the world broaden access too, like the more than $260 million of financing the United States is providing to help upgrade infrastructure in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Rio is in the process of installing 5,000 public Wi-Fi access points, as well as public lighting systems that cut electricity consumption by up to 60%, while also lowering costs and cutting their emissions. And 3/4 of these investments will be made in neighborhoods where people live below the city's average income level. Second, we're working with partners to update and establish as necessary rules and norms so that technology is developed and used in ways that reflect our democratic values and interests. That includes for old technologies like the internet. We've long promoted an open, interoperable, secure, reliable internet, principles that created the conditions for the internet to grow into a dynamic force for learning, for connection, for economic opportunity. But everyone in this room knows, and colleagues who are joining us online know, that the internet is also growing more closed, more insecure, more siloed by the day. More countries are putting up firewalls and shutting down access, using the internet to try to control speech, quash dissent, spread misinformation and disinformation. So, we are using all the tools in our kit, from software to hardware, from trade to diplomacy, to defend our longstanding vision and stand against these and other threats. A year ago, we launched the Declaration for the Future of the Internet. It reaffirms our commitment to a single open network of networks that respects democratic principles and human rights. To date, more than 65 partners and counting have joined us in making this pledge and taking action to make that pledge real. We also recognize that we have to do better at addressing some of the risks that come with the open internet. People have important concerns about how platforms collect, exploit, and share our personal data, fan the flames of polarization and extremism, endanger women and girls, children, LGBTQI+ people, and other vulnerable groups. Tackling these and other issues requires a delicate balance of the principles at the heart of our vision, such as between openness and security, between protecting speech and preventing incitement, between fostering innovation and limiting the power of big tech. And I think it's more than obvious to say we do not yet have all the answers. We're all working on them, thinking about them, struggling with them, but we have to engage this. Our people, and increasingly our companies, are looking to democratic governments to help establish limits for how platforms can collect, use, and share citizens' personal data. We have heard that message. That's why, in addition to using his authority to address these issues, President Biden has been urging Congress to pass strong bipartisan legislation to protect Americans' privacy. The President's also made clear that we need to be able to hold platforms accountable when they fail to address the harms caused by their technology, from the content they spread to the algorithms that they use. It's also why we're stepping up to shape the rules and guidelines around emerging digital tools like artificial intelligence. The rollout of AI chatbots in recent months has demonstrated how quickly this technology is evolving, how big of an impact it's going to have on each of our lives. In October, we put out a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, 5 principles to try to guide the way we design, use, deploy automated systems in ways that protect our people and defend our democratic values. These include the principle that people should be protected from unsafe or ineffective AI, that people should know when an automated system is being used and understand how it affects them. We've also developed a risk management framework to give individuals, organizations, and societies practical guidance on how to measure and manage the risks of automated systems and make AI that's safe, that's accountable, that's fair, that protects privacy. These principles and guidelines aren't meant to be the final word in navigating the extraordinary complexities around AI and other emerging tools. We know the technology is changing too fast for that. And speaking as someone who's in government And again, you all know this, many from experience, government is constantly playing catch-up when it comes to technology. And at a time when things seem to be evolving more quickly than ever before, that game of catch-up is even more intense than ever before. But we have to find ways to create guardrails that will continue to strengthen and improve, on together with partners. Third big piece, we're doubling down on investing in democracy's ability to lead on technological innovation. Our ability to shape the digital landscape depends in significant part on maintaining our competitive edge in innovation. Democracy's free flow of ideas and information gives us a built-in advantage, but we can't take our own dynamism for granted. We have to continue to find ways to foster it, to catalyze it, to support it, to encourage it. And that's the basic idea behind the historic investment that President Biden and Congress have made through the CHIPS and Science Act, through the Inflation Reduction Act, through the bipartisan infrastructure law. It's the biggest investment that America has made in generations in revitalizing key industries, recharging our manufacturing base, leading the global energy transition, and boosting basic research, something we've gotten away from in recent decades, while also bolstering the resilience and security of the supply chains that underpin every single one of these efforts. And we're not just investing here at home. We're laying the foundation for innovation in democracies around the world, because leaps in rights-affirming and privacy-respecting technologies don't just benefit the countries where they're invented. They are good for people everywhere. That's the idea behind the pledge we made at the recent Africa Leaders Summit right here in this convention center to dedicate more than $350 million toward digital transformation in African countries, which will unlock catalytic investments from the private sector on the continent. We're urging allies and partners to make these investments too, because our collective competitiveness depends on it. And democracies are answering the call, such as the G7's unprecedented commitment to spend tens of billions of dollars on tech infrastructure around the globe in the coming years. Fourth, we are pushing back vigorously on authoritarian governments' increasing use of technology to abuse human rights and undermine democracy. That starts with shoring up our resilience against efforts by autocratic governments to sow distrust in democracy, to weaken our institutions, to reach across borders, to target people in our countries. A key part of that is countering the disinformation and misinformation that authoritarian governments spread to polarize our societies. We're doing that not only by exposing lies and manipulations, but by disseminating the truth through individuals, networks, independent media that local communities trust. We're taking steps to protect the security of our citizens' data from authoritarian governments, particularly those with a track record of gathering such information to profile our people, to target those that they see as critics, to steal intellectual property. Protecting this information is also vital to preventing these governments from exploiting platforms to shape what our citizens see online. We're working to thwart the efforts of autocrats to use technology to repress people within as well as beyond their borders. Together with 35 fellow governments and the Freedom Online Coalition, we led an effort to develop a set of guiding principles to encourage the responsible use of surveillance technology, to prevent its misuse by bad actors, such as targeting people based solely on their race, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation, political views, or any other classification that is protected by international law. We're taking immediate steps to translate these principles into practice. Just this week, President Biden issued an executive order that bans the U.S. government's use of commercial spyware that poses a risk to our national security or that has been misused by foreign actors to abuse human rights. And we're working to help people living under repressive regimes get access to digital tools, including the uncensored internet. Last September, when the killing of Mahsa Amini by Iran's security forces sparked months of massive protests, the regime cracked down viciously, killing hundreds of people, imprisoning tens of thousands more, and routinely shutting down the internet. In response, we teamed up with companies and civil society groups to help provide the Iranian people with ongoing access to the internet and other vital communications tools so that they could continue to communicate with one another and with the outside world, to shine a spotlight on the regime's abuses. New reforms that we rolled out this week will make it easier for our government to provide similar support for people who are facing digital crackdowns in other countries. It's not just Iran, where the private sector and civil society are working with democratic governments to push back against digital authoritarianism. Since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February of last year, businesses and citizens from the United States and other democracies have been on the front lines, helping Ukraine defend its independence, its right to exist, its very democracy. These volunteers have helped maintain connectivity for Ukrainian government institutions and citizens, despite the relentless attacks, providing the Ukrainian government with free access to a secure cloud to store sensitive national databases, helping to counter Moscow's disinformation campaigns on social media. Companies and citizens from democracies have come forward because they believe technology should be used to affirm people's rights, not abuse them, and that it should empower people to define their own path, not allow others to use coercion and violence to choose that path for them. This brings me to a final point that I want to leave you with, and it's the reason that ultimately we feel optimistic about democracy's ability to deliver in a period where technology is once again, as during Thomas Edison's lifetime, reorganizing the life of the world. For all of the challenges that these disruptive technologies present, no system of government is better equipped to drive the forces that they represent in improving our people's lives than democracy. We excel at innovation. We're nimble. We encourage a multiplicity of voices and perspectives to find solutions. We let the best ideas rise to the top, rather than assuming that the best ideas come from the top. We believe our people have a vital role to play in the ongoing process of making our system better, of fixing its flaws. We embrace vigorous and open debate within and across our democracies. And while we democracies may not be perfectly aligned, we may not agree on everything, on how to proceed, we don't try to be. Our willingness to try out different approaches openly, transparently, lets us learn from one another, lets us adapt, lets us improve. Indeed, on all four of the priorities that I set out today, using technology to improve our people's lives in tangible ways, establishing rights-respecting rules for emerging technologies, investing in our innovation, and countering authoritarian governments' use of digital tools to abuse people and weaken democracies, on every single one of those lines of effort, our success ultimately depends on working effectively together. To pass the test, we have to continue to build and broaden coalitions of allies and partners who share our democratic values, who are committed to putting them at the heart of our shared technological future. Whether they're in government or civil society, whether they're innovators or regulators, academics or activists, or simply citizens, we're counting on them, we're counting on you to be part of this collective effort. And in fact, that's exactly what we see in the group gathered at the Summit for Democracy. And that's what gives us confidence that our democracies will not only survive a truly unprecedented period of technological transformation, but shape it to the benefit of our people and to people around the world. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for taking part in this summit. And I'm now looking forward to a conversation with some colleagues. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Blinken. To build a more rights-respecting future, it's clear that democracies need to define an affirmative vision for how technology can promote democracy. Our first session, Advancing Democracy and Internet Freedom in a Digital Age, will help us think through how we might craft a world in which technology and democracy are mutually reinforcing. We're joined today by three speakers. Let me introduce them now. Jorge Arguello is Ambassador of Argentina to the United States. Nighat Dad is Executive Director of Digital Rights Foundation And Funke Opeke is CEO and founder of Main One. And I will now give the floor back to our moderator for this session, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
Thank you, Jean. So this is what I really like, because I actually get to ask the questions for once. And we have a great group of colleagues to hear from, to listen to, and to learn from. So I'm really thrilled to be able to join each of you today and to, I think, focus on a few things. I think we all recognize that democracies have to make an affirmative case for how societies can leverage technology to actually advance, to make progress, and as we were talking about just a few minutes ago, to actually try to deliver positive results for our people. And I think we also recognize that the same human rights that we are so engaged in defending offline have to be also respected online. And this is one of the big challenges of our time. We have to have an internet, we have to have a digital ecosystem that respects and protects those rights. And each of you in different ways is engaged in that. So a few things that I wanted to try to put on the table and invite our colleagues to talk about. First of all, my friend, Ambassador Arguello, Argentina is a member of the Freedom Online Coalition. We're very proud to chair this effort, and many in this room are members. As you're looking at it from Argentina's perspective, tell us a little bit about how you see Argentina working to advance internet freedom and to protect the space that we all have to share.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Secretary Antony. Good morning to everyone here. First and foremost, I would like to stress that our country is highly honored to be part of this important event, as well as to be part of the second Summit for Democracy and endorse its final declaration. As you all know, and you probably know, or you may know, our president, Alberto Fernandez, the president of Argentina, was in Washington, D.C. yesterday in order to have a bilateral meeting with President Biden, which was held yesterday at the White House. Our foreign minister, Santiago Cafiero, was part of the presidential delegation. He received the invitation to participate in this panel as a speaker. Unfortunately, he was called away for last-minute business, and he's now in Buenos Aires for what he asked me to convey his deepest apologies to you all. But let me now turn to the topic that gathers us today. Information and communication technologies are in process of constant progress and have become fundamental tools that improve productivity for development, both economically and socially, fostering greater participation of societies and allowing better access to knowledge, while promoting the strengthening of education in our countries. Likewise, and from the point of view of government interaction with citizens, within the framework of truly democratic societies, these technologies have enhanced the capacity to provide quality, agile services with greater transparency, open communications, and greater participation. In this sense, increasing access to these technologies while strengthening connectivity and achieving the universalization of ICT services is a clear priority that allows us to avoid digital exclusion and reduce inequality. Therefore, aspiring to a knowledge society cannot be dissociated from the achievement of the highest possible levels of social inclusion. The achievement of one will not be fair or democratic if it is not built on the basis of the other. The adoption and implementation of technologies are still a challenge for many countries because while some technologies make leaps of great magnitude, certain technologies, groups, industries, sectors, workers go at a different pace and require a different policy approach. We must look closely at the different divides, gender, rural, industrial systems, security systems, and analyze together with the private sector and civil society which are the best policies to address those gaps. In Argentina, ARSAT, the state-owned telecommunications company which operates the federal fiber optic network, plays a key role in connecting the unconnected, reaching the demand of small and medium-sized companies, cooperatives, and rural areas. ARSAT, the company, was present some weeks ago here in DC for the satellite conference and had many meetings with US governments and companies to enhance cooperation in telecommunication and data centers. Also, it is important to highlight that in Argentina, fundamental human rights are protected by a solid legal framework guaranteed by our national constitution and in international treaties that have a constitutional hierarchy. The exercise of the rights of freedom of expression and association and the right to privacy is protected and guaranteed in the virtual and real world by the three branches of government. Bearing this in mind, I would like to share with you some important milestones of our laws and policies regarding the ICTs. Argentina has a law which states that, and I'm going to read, the search, reception, and dissemination of information and ideas of all kinds through the Internet service is considered to be included within the constitutional guarantee that protects freedom of expression. Another law guarantees the complete neutrality of networks in all telecommunication services and ICT developments. Now, due to the boost we provide to the ICT sector, knowledge-based services represent the fourth largest export complex in Argentina, and the development of Argentine technology companies with high levels of competitiveness is on the rise. We have also adopted the new knowledge economy law, which broadens and deepens incentives into the sector. Likewise, under the firm conviction that certain vulnerable groups deserve special protection, in 2020, we sanctioned the law, which creates a national program for the prevention and awareness of grooming or cyberbullying against children and adolescents, a crime that was also incorporated to our national criminal code. On the other hand, regarding hate speech and its dissemination, it is worth mentioning that such crime is contemplated. As an open, multicultural, and multi-religious society, in Argentina, we strongly believe in our duty to work for an internet free of hate speech. Our rejection of online terrorism is clear and resounding. Argentina adhered to the Christchurch call in September 2019. The call focuses on the delicate and sensitive balance between security considerations and freedom of expression and data privacy. Argentina has participated in many areas regarding the right of freedom of expression in digital context. We have adhered to a number of international instances, such as the Information and Democracy Forum or the Declaration for the Future of the Internet. Likewise, since June 2016, Argentina has been a member of the Freedom Online Coalition, and we are very proud to work in that sense. In that regard, we wish the U.S. every success in its new chairmanship and reiterate our willingness to work together constructively. The Argentine Republic plays an active role in international and regional forums on issues related to human rights in the digital environment. Finally, Anthony, and before giving back the floor to you, I would like to reaffirm our country's deep commitment to the development of information and communication technologies as fundamental tools for the empowerment of our peoples with free access without exclusion, which allows a true strengthening of societies, helping education and culture, and access to information, as well as a better economic development. We governments, along with the private sector, along with the civil society, must tirelessly work together to make this happen. Thank you very much, Secretary.
Pastor, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing that with all of us. Let's talk a little bit about digital inclusion. So, Ms. Dodd, you are working to do exactly that, to try to make sure that women and girls, other marginalized communities are able to access technology and use it to thrive. So what I want to focus on here is your own experience through civil society in advancing rights and inclusion in the digital ecosystem.
Firstly, it's a pleasure to share this panel with esteemed panelists. As a civil society in past few years, we have had a front row seat in seeing the role of digital technologies and internet in both advancing democracies and undermining institutions integral to a free democratic space. And holding these two realities together is important as we truly want to present a holistic picture of the role that technologies play in our democracies. These two binaries also come as no surprise to me, having worked with young women and girls in Pakistan regarding their access to technologies and internet, which can be both as a liberating space in their lives, but also abuse and violence, not only online, but offline as well. So it's really important that when we all are talking about digital rights, we center the experiences of marginalized groups, young women and girls, female journalists, women human rights defenders, activists, when we talk about democracy in the digital age, because these experiences have a lot to teach us. And when it comes to technologies and digital spaces, there are two very main stakeholders who are dominating this space. One is governments around the world, and the second is tech companies, platforms. On one hand, we have governments scrambling to acquire technologies and pass laws that would allow them to control the internet and dominate the pervasive narratives in these spaces. The loss of control over the information we consume and who gets to speak has been troubling for governments with long histories of interrupted and weak democratic rule. Even in countries where rule of law is strong, what we have seen is that they also struggle to come up with really good regulations, the regulations that respect international human rights framework. And on the other hand, we have powerful platforms dominating this space with so much space, profit margins, power to control content and our data. And often we have seen that in my experience, the decade-long work that we have seen that they are mostly unaccountable towards the governments, but also mainly towards the users who should be the center of the conversation in these spaces. And this sort of throws up fundamental question about democracy. Do we want powerful tech companies to decide our democratic future? And while we are looking into these questions about governments and powerful companies, I think it's important to talk about solutions also. And there is this one solution, which is self-regulatory model. It's an independent Meta's oversight board that the company came up with the solution to hold itself accountable. But the question is, are they holding themselves accountable independently and transparently? And the answer is that yes, this model that came up 3 years ago, where the people who are actually making decisions around content moderation of this platform are from diverse backgrounds. I sit on the board. I'm from global majority. English is not my first language. I bring experiences of the marginalized groups, not only from Pakistan, but South Asia. But then telling companies sitting on this board that the decision that you are making are not truly democratic, are not following international human rights framework, and then come up with solution to tell them what they can do in these situations. And how we are making ourselves transparent is that actually releasing our reports, that the progress that we have made, the progress that the company has made so far. So I think these are the regulatory models I feel are so important to hold these companies accountable. If I talk about my own personal experience as Digital Rights Foundation head in Pakistan, I feel that the global majority is actually at the end of at the receiving end, the decisions that the global north, not only governments, but the tech platforms make. And there is a very little say of the users, especially from global south or global majority. There are such initiatives, local initiatives. If you look around, there's so many civil society organizations around the world who have been working on digital rights for such a long time. They have come up with local solutions. They have been part of international debates, but I think, and we'll speak about this later in the panel conversation as well, that these local solutions need to be taken into account in the global conversations. We cannot really come up with the top-down approach. I think we really need to see what people are locally doing, how they are contextualizing this issue, how they are holding their governments accountable who are coming up with bad regulations and laws while preserving speech in the online space. At the same time, holding people in the global north accountable, that what they are deciding can set bad precedents for the authoritarian regimes as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think particularly the last point that you were making about the need to look to local solutions, to look to local ideas, to do this from the bottom up and the middle out, not just the top down, is going to be vital to success, and ultimately to having sustainable ways of doing things, because if people are not bought in, they will opt out one way or the other. So appreciate that very much. Accessibility. Ms. Apeke, tell us about how you are looking at this in the work that you're doing in Africa, and particularly operationalizing accessibility. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but we always run the risk with new technologies of having totally bifurcated worlds, and those who have access to them, those who don't. And this is a vital part of your mission. Tell us how you're seeing it.
Okay. Thank you, Secretary Blinken, and truly is an honor to be a part of this distinguished panel. As you mentioned, Main One, which is a company that I run, was founded in 2008 to address the digital divide in Africa. It was informed, the vision was informed at that time with the reality that internet access was only a 10% penetration rate when the rest of the world was at 50%. Today, we have 70% global internet penetration, but most of the African continent is at 50% or below. And so we set out to try to close that gap with a focus on West Africa. Now, how were we able to do that? Nigeria, which is the country that I am from, had returned to democratic rule in 1999. And coming in 2001, on the heels of that, was the liberalization of the telecommunications sector, which enabled private sector companies to deploy telecoms infrastructure for the first time to deliver to citizens. And so coming on the heels of that, we were able to obtain licenses in Nigeria and Ghana, the first private licenses for open access submarine cables to connect West Africa to the rest of the world through Europe. Doing that, building that 7,000-kilometer cable, which initially served 2 countries in West Africa, but is delivering a mix of services to 11 countries today, is part of what has enabled that growth in access to 50%. So what really are the building blocks on which we did that? First was the liberalization. And it is worth noting that not all African countries today have liberalized their telecommunications laws, which says with the shortage of resources and the large infrastructure deficits that a lot of these countries face, they're not able to accelerate digital transformation of their economies because they're not enabling private capital to come in. The next step of our journey, of course, was private capital. And the African Development Bank was a key anchor. So having the kind of patient, more higher risk appetite capital to come into this market. Obviously, skills, and then access to technology, where we had an American company with the depth of experience and capacity deploy the network for us. So what do we see today is that the work is not done yet. And of course, as you go further down the pyramid and try to enable access and more inclusion, it does get more challenging. The word is, what we have to do in these economies is truly grow the market, because the value chain in terms of realizing the return from investment in digital infrastructure is simply not as mature as you have in the advanced economies. So there is a lot of partnering. There is a need for patient capital to consider the affordability and also provision of other elements in the value chain, which in places like Lagos, Nigeria, or Cape Town, South Africa, or Nairobi, Kenya, on the African continent, you're starting to see today. But there's still a lot more to be done. The obvious returns are there are successful companies of scale delivering these services on the African continent. So it proves that it can be done. And that delivering such infrastructure is also providing dividends for democracy, because as you have greater shared prosperity, job creation, financial inclusion, access to services, people are able to drive better outcomes. We're able to reduce unemployment rates, put more people to work. Africa, when you think of it, with 50% internet penetration of a population of 1.4 billion, that's about 700 million people. The average age on the continent is 19. Who do not have access and constitute the workforce of tomorrow. So getting the access to those who have currently been excluded so they can form part of this fabric we are building is really critical. And that's building the partnerships to enable that is, I think, going to be critical to get there.
Really want to underscore the point that you made about this not being a favor that one group of countries may be doing for another. It's profoundly in everyone's interest. And in the case of Africa, as you point out, the next 20 years, we'll have one in 4 people on this planet being from and of Africa. Bridging these divides is going to be hugely important. I want to come back to one thing that you mentioned, then maybe we can go a little deeper on some of the things that people have already touched on. You mentioned the importance of private capital, and of course that's exactly right. And most of our governments, most of our systems can't simply dedicate and direct state resources to some of these challenges. But what we can do, what our comparative advantage is in catalyzing and leveraging private sector investment. Based on this experience, though, what do you see, and you've touched on it a little bit, as some of the impediments to that? And then are there any thoughts that you have about how that can be facilitated? You mentioned the need to actually make markets. I'm hopeful, for example, that as the free trade area in Africa actually emerges and we get beyond this abnormal situation where African countries trade more with countries outside of Africa than they do with themselves, that will also help create markets that attract investment in an easier way. But are there other things that come to mind based on your experience?
Yes, understood about governments not being able to write checks, open checks, to drive private infrastructure investment in developing countries. However, for the funds that have been identified, I believe helping to create the frameworks, a lot of these lesser developed economies do not have strong institutions. One of the areas where progress can be made and impact can be driven is helping to strengthen the frameworks, helping to strengthen the work of institutions that are set up to establish and guide those examples. And I really think that's where the most impact can be made. As you mentioned also with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, implementation has not kept pace with expectations that were set a few years ago when the Free Trade Agreement went into effect. So what can be done? And based on the US experience in setting up and working with such agreements to actually facilitate implementation and impact. I believe that's probably where the most impact can be had for the kind of checks that can be written by the US government.
Thank you. So we have an expression, I'm from the federal government, I'm here to help. So I'm from the federal government, I'm here to help. From the perspective of civil society, what can governments be doing better, more effectively to make sure that we're advancing inclusion, that we're making sure that in particularly underserved people, community groups have the benefit of accessibility and also are not finding themselves in the situation where these tools and this technology is actually being used against them?
I think for that, there has been a lot of conversation around including civil society in these conversations. I think first and foremost is we need to really see who are the people from civil society in these conversations. Are these only people from Western democracy and global North? And if civil society from global majority is not part of these conversations, then why not? And I think that leads us to the conversation where civil society is being, civic space has been eroded. Very slowly, very gradually, and no one even felt that. And I think what Western democracies who are setting good precedents, they can also hold those governments accountable, that why this is happening, why these civil society cannot participate in these conversations if they are not truly liberated. And I think the second point is, do they have resources to do that? I think empowering them, not only making them included in these conversations, but also, do they have money to do that? And I think while I'm saying these resources, I have seen people doing a lot of labor in these countries for labor towards these companies, telling them what are the gaps that they have so that they can make these online spaces safer for their own communities, and telling government that the laws that they are making are problematic. So it's free labor. It's a thankless job. And I think what governments like US can do is actually help empowering civil society, not only in their own jurisdiction, but around the world, and hold other governments accountable what exactly they are doing to keep this space safer and freer for civil society.
Thank you. Ambassador, any thoughts from the perspective of your country, your government, both on these questions of inclusion and these questions of accessibility?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would like to stress the importance of the battle we are facing. And allow me to congratulate you for calling for this gathering. For me, it's very important to share the floor with my Nigerian and Pakistani friends. They do a very important work in their countries from the civil society. And something what we must having clear is that there must be an alliance between the government, the civil society, and the private sector. Otherwise, it will not fly. And what we are trying to do is precisely to have it flying. In the case of our country, we are working with different international initiatives. I wrote here the Information for Democracy Forum. We have been working together in that sense. The Declaration for the Future of the Internet and the Freedom for Online Coalition. These are our main activities we develop in the international field. And I would like to stress something that Funke just said. The work is not done yet. The battle is starting. Our democracy, the national democracy, the international democracy, the freedom is at stake. So we must be part of this discussion. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. I'm cognizant of time. I want to make sure that we get some other people in on this conversation. So we have a number of, probably 600 experts in this audience today, but we can't hear from everyone. But there are a few people I'd like to call on, just to get perspectives and also any questions that you have for our wonderful panelists. So Abila Toledo from the Wikimedia Foundation, who's working on technology's impacts on human rights. Amelia, are you here?
Thank you to the panel. My question is, digitalization happening across government, how can they ensure that tech companies are respecting the human rights of individuals?
Okay. If I may, I think that's a very important question because it needs a clear answer. There is only one way to guarantee that, and it's the development of a strong legal framework. So I want to reiterate, there is an alliance to put on the table between the government, the civil society, and the private sector. Otherwise, we won't be able to protect the right of freedom of expression, both, as you said, Anthony, online and offline. So I think that that's our main target to play.
Other thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, yes, governments are powerful and they are already bringing a lot of regulations and laws to hold companies accountable. But I think it's important that we look into other mechanisms where these platforms find themselves accountable as well. And one initiative I have already mentioned, like independent oversight body, which is truly independent and which is also transparent. But I would also like to be very cautious towards giving an only solution like regulatory framework and laws, because it really doesn't work for everyone around the world. There are regulations and laws that we have seen that were made in the name of protecting young women and girls in the online space, cyber harassment, abuse, hate speech, disinformation, but those laws have been weaponized against the very same people. So I think we really need to see how those laws are being made, whether the governments are following international human rights framework, whether civil society is part of those conversations while these laws are being drafted. started and then implemented, and whether the judges are actually trained to develop good jurisprudence.
Good. Thank you. Next from our audience, Franny Marovich from the International Press Institute, who's working on advancing press freedoms around the world.
Thank you very much, Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen. I'll be interested, as digitalization is happening across governments and different departments are working, how can you ensure that it's all coordinated around the human rights agenda, that the human rights is at the focus of the work of each government department as they work on digitalization and promoting media freedom? Thank you.
Question. Anyone want to
Maybe
jump
that's
in?
for you, Secretary.
I was afraid you were going to say that. No, it's a hugely important question, and it goes to the work that we're trying to do to make sure that questions, obligations, responsibilities when it comes to human rights are infused in pretty much everything we do, including in places in our own department that might not naturally take that perspective into account when they're trying to formulate policy or advance policy. So one of the challenges, I think, for particularly our organizations in government is to make sure that we're working horizontally as much as possible, because virtually everything we're talking about today connects to the equities of 7, 8, 10, 12 different offices in my own department, and it's the same, I'm sure, for the ambassador and other colleagues in government. So one of the things that we've made a real effort to do is to make sure that in each of our bureaus, both from a geographic perspective, but also a functional perspective, the human rights perspective and dimension is included in the deliberations. At the same time, we've tried to bring together in the State Department under one roof all of these questions to include the human rights dimension of technology in a new bureau that we stood up for cyberspace and digital policy, as well as for emerging technologies. So partly this is a question of making sure that the direction, the responsibility to do that is clearly communicated, but it's also about setting up the mechanisms within government to make sure that that voice, that perspective is being included, and we've tried to organize ourselves to do that. I don't know if you've had a similar experience.
Yes, I do. I agree with what you have said. I would add that our target, what we are pursuing when we talk about human rights, is a key word. We are trying to guarantee access. We are trying for everybody, for everyone, all over the world. We are trying to guarantee a true democratization of knowledge. That's human right. And allow me to celebrate a decision made by the Biden administration. Argentina has a very firm stand in the human rights field, probably because of our own terrible experience during the last dictatorships in the 70s. But I said the international community is still celebrating the return of the U.S. to the Human Rights Committee of the United Nations. We are working together. We are coordinating every action, not only between us, but with all the members of the committee, the commission. But I think that is very important, and that will allow us to contribute to guarantee that everybody can engage in this public discussion.
Please.
I would like to speak from the standpoint of weaker democracies, which governments are not necessarily inclined to protect human rights. And in such economies or such countries, what we're finding is access in and of itself starts providing citizens with a voice and a means of easier, faster information dissemination to call attention to the issues and actually push for their rights to be protected. So, taking another, yes, there are governments that are working actively to promote human rights, but there are also governments who want to silence those dissenting voices. and the more access is enabled and is free and affordable, the more we're able to have those dissenting voices speak out.
Yeah, it's a very powerful point. I'll give you one other example, Franny, because you're working on press freedom every single day. One of the things we see from autocratic governance is an effort basically to use lawfare to silence journalists who were just doing their jobs. At this very summit a year ago, one of the initiatives that came out of it was standing up a fund that journalists, media enterprises, particularly small independent media that usually doesn't have the resources, a fund that they can tap into if they're on the receiving end of bogus legal proceedings that are trying, in effect, to drive them out of business. That's just one initiative among many. As we look at what is being done and how technology is being used or misused to try to silence voices, whether it's from media or from civil society or human rights defenders, we're also looking at what tools can we provide to help them more effectively defend themselves. And that's just one example. John Morris from the Internet Society, working on expanding Internet access and freedom.
Thank you very much. At the Internet Society, we believe that the Internet, the open, globally connected, secure, and trustworthy Internet is a tremendous enabler of democracy. But increasingly, decisions by governments in democratic countries and non-democratic countries are threatening the Internet's operations and its global nature. So my question is, how can we ensure that governments proactively assess the potential harmful impact on the Internet from their policy proposals so that we don't inadvertently undermine both global speech, global Internet access, and democracy worldwide?
I think we should stress the importance of the civil society. You have invited 3 of us, 2 of them come from the civil society, NGOs. And that's very important because it's true that not every government works in this direction. Some governments do exactly the contrary. So the multilateral fora, the organizations from the civil society are called to play a key role in this issue.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I think it's imperative on us in government in particular to make sure that we have all of the different stakeholders in on the takeoff, not just on the landing, precisely because we need to make sure that we're factoring in these different perspectives, precisely because there are inevitably, to your point, second and third order consequences that we may not see because we're coming at it from one perspective that we need to be able to identify up front before it's too late. And we actually have an effect that is not the one that we wanted to have. And it goes to a point I was making earlier when I was speaking, and I found this over 30 years in government, particularly when it comes to technology. The pace with which it's moving is so fast, and the relative lack of expertise in government is such that we're constantly playing catch up and just understanding, never mind trying to figure out what is the appropriate rule, norm, regulation that actually makes sense, doesn't have second and third order consequences that we don't like, that somehow balances the different equities that are in play. I think one of the answers to this for me, besides making sure that the stakeholders are at the table from the takeoff, is actually to make sure that in government itself, we have more of this expertise. And that it's not only, as important as that is, so-called outside stakeholders that are involved, but within our own institutions. We have people who have come up in these disciplines who bring that perspective to bear and can make a huge difference in making, helping us to make policy. One of the things that struck me some years ago in government was so much of what we do actually has a technological or innovative solution as part, at least, of the answer, what we're doing. But so many of us, again, are not coming up in these disciplines. And we need technologists, innovators, civil society, and others in the room, sometimes even just to tell us whether we need technologists, innovators, and civil societies in the room. Because, again, it's identifying a problem from the outset that we may not see. So I think it just goes to this point that both of us are making, that unless everyone with an equity, a perspective, an experience on these questions is in on the takeoff, we're probably not going to have a smooth landing. So we have a few minutes left. One of the things that I know bedevils all of us in different ways is how we think about dealing with disinformation and misinformation that's in our ecosystems, and to do it in a way that is protective of speech, not destructive of it, and to do it in a way, again, that uses. Truth has now become a subjective word, so I hate to use it, but that brings truth to bear. I'm just wondering, from each of your perspectives, if this is something that you've had to grapple with, to think about, and whether there are any ideas that you want to surface today in helping us think about it. Just throwing that out there.
We need a growing, transparent, public discussion. This is the way we should follow to pursue the target. I want to share something with you. In Argentina, we are doing an experiment, an electoral experiment. We have called, I have mentioned government, civil society, private sector. We have called Facebook and Twitter. And there is a public agreement between the government, the political parties, and these two companies related to the electoral debate in Argentina, for example. That's what is the idea? The idea is to guarantee transparency in the discussion, the possibility of having everyone on board, every sector on board, and particularly, or I would like to stress, to guarantee a real public debate where everyone has the chance to participate. I think that might be a new, in my country, it's going to be a new tool that will provide a better situation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think more conversation is needed, education, awareness raising among stakeholders, government officials, judiciary. But at the same time, I think keeping an eye that there's always this tendency from the powerful actors to criminalize this kind of speech. And I think we have to be very, very careful if governments are making these decisions, how civil society can be part of those conversations. And I believe that more speech is an answer and not banning the speech. And just want to mention one initiative that I'm also part of is because misinformation and disinformation has harmed women and girls online, female journalists. It has increased online gender-based violence, and this global partnership on to address tech-facilitated violence, which again, U.S. government is taking a leading role, and other governments are part of it. I think these are the kind of initiatives that we need more, and also like-minded governments are part of such kind of partnerships. We need to see how we can bring those governments which are not like-minded and how they are becoming part of these conversations. I think that that's much needed.
Thank you.
Well, I think what you have are that the most powerful and motivated and the authoritarian voices then try to crowd people out and feed a lot of this misinformation. So I also agree that more conversation is required, but the broadening of access so that the advantage some of these people have in weaponizing, in being the loudest and the sometimes the only voices or the strongest voices in the room can be crowded out by broader sections of society.
Good.
Secretary, can I just one last thing? I really want to commend the executive order that has been issued by the President Biden to ban spyware, which violates human rights. And I would like to acknowledge that civil society has been doing a lot of work for years around this issue. And I think you guys have set a really good precedent for other governments. And we would like to see this kind of decision coming from other Western democracies and then hopefully from other regimes as well. Thank you.
Well, you just heard it, so thank you. We are predictably out of time. I just want to see if anyone has any last things that they want to say, put on the table that they didn't get a chance to say. Pastor, anything?
I just want to thank you again. This is the way, this is the direction we should work on. So I want you to know that we will try to reproduce this scenario in our country following what you're doing here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anything?
I just want to say empower civil society, give them resources, make them part of these conversations in proper spirit, and I think that's it.
Good way to conclude. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Secretary Blinken. Before Administrator Samantha Power comes on stage, let's watch a brief video from USAID.
Technology has the power to transform lives and connect us like never before. But when it undermines human rights or democratic values, technology becomes a form of repression. Mounting evidence suggests that the misuse of technology erodes trust and stifles freedom. It threatens the foundations of our global democracy. The United States government, working closely with partner countries, has been leading efforts to ensure that technology advances democratic values, supporting an internet that is open, free, global, interoperable, reliable, and secure, and promoting digital ecosystems that respect individual privacy and foster inclusion. We can stem the growing tide of digital repression and drive technological innovation that has democratic values at its core. USAID, in collaboration with DevTech Systems, is leading global research to better understand how technology and data impact democracy and human rights. The evidence gathered will support innovative new programming at USAID under the Advancing Digital Democracy Initiative. Preliminary results from this research show that communities across the globe want more democratic digital governance, and they are forging new partnerships and strengthening existing ones to make this happen. In Indonesia, the government is building multi-stakeholder networks to address cross-border data flows and ensure the free flow of data with trust. In Serbia, the Commissioner for Data Protection, private sector companies, and civic actors are collaborating to implement Serbia's data protection law. In Zambia, the government is partnering with local organizations to form a multi-stakeholder platform that will facilitate digital transformation and advocate for rights-respecting legal frameworks. These are promising opportunities, but much work remains to be done. By working together to build diverse coalitions and share knowledge, we can create policies and incentivize investments that advance the values we hold dear. Only by working together can we confront the digital challenges we face and foster a rights-respecting digital future.
And we will now hear